Jacob, is there a reason I'm unable to pin Councillor Martin? Councillor Rabbit?
Somebody in council chambers, I think, with the audio. You know, Tom, if you go to the top where there's the little people, go off mute for a second.
Okay.
Go down. So then the list of names will actually just come up.
Okay, so what you mean though, Madam Mayor, is now I'm showing participants and the names of the people come up, yes.
Now, if you just put the hand over the name and you right click, even from that list, you'll get the pin function even from there.
Yes, Madam Mayor, but that's the problem. The pin function is shadowed. I have pinned several other people doing the same exact thing, and now there's 3 or 4 people I'm not able to do that with. I understand that Jacob is trying to rectify this.
Well, the other thing we could do is I could start the meeting and you can, as soon as you get it figured out, you can let me know.
Well, maybe I'll just wait to have a quick report from Jacob if he's able to tell me what kind of progress he's making. Perhaps Kevin can also assist me there.
Yeah, hi. Chair Michelle, I'll check in with Jacob for a quick sec.
Okay, thank you. We'll just hold on for a couple of minutes, see what they find out. It's got to be something simple. I've got everybody else on except some people can't.
Mr. Chair, if I may, through to Jacob, last time we had this problem, my screen, and I was getting messages from the public that it was quite blurry and the audio wasn't great. And it had, I think when he corrected the screen, it assisted. And I can see again the entire laptop. Like I can see the start bar and Internet Explorer and so on down along the bottom. He did make a change last time that made it more full screen, and it did clear up the visuals. But I'm
Okay,
not all that familiar with Teams.
yeah, Councillor Martin, I don't have that screen. I've got what I think is the correct screen. I believe now, just give me one more moment here. I believe now I have the pinning function, so just give me a moment, everyone. I will get everybody to where we need to be. I see that Mr. Wallace is here. Thank you, Brent, for being here to help me. And Jacob, thank you for your help, and Kevin. I am just in the process. Oh, again, I've pinned one person, but I cannot pin our CAO. Not sure why that is, but I was successful in pinning Councillor Martin. And I'm not successful in pinning anyone else. So, yes, Jacob, I am using the Teams app. I went through this with Brent the other day. We have the Teams app installed. I clicked on use the Teams app. I don't know if it will go back to that again. No, it doesn't seem to be making a difference.
To
Okay.
assist committee, if you aren't pinned on the screen and you have something to say, you could either do the raise hand function or just politely interrupt if you need to get your say in there. I think that's the best way forward if the pinning continues to be problematic.
Okay, let me just try one more. No. Okay, Kevin, so if everybody is ready, I think okay, so I think actually, Kevin, we'll do the best we can as you're suggesting, if that's all right.
Yeah, that's all right. You do, I'm just looking at the screen here. You got the Brady Brunch squares going. You're looking pretty good. So there is 8 of you, but one is our CIO. So we are missing one person, but off the top of my head, I can't figure out which counselor is in here, but you're in pretty good order.
Okay.
Councillor
So
Rabbit.
then I will begin. Good afternoon and welcome to this council and committee meeting for February the 9th. I would like to remind everyone that our meetings are web streamed and televised. I would ask you to ensure that your phones are on silent mode, to keep your camera on and mute yourself when not speaking, and of course to unmute yourself when you are speaking. Please use the Microsoft Teams hand icon feature to be called upon and to remove it after you're finished speaking. I will, of course, also try to look at the screen for those of you who are visual to me to see if you have your hand raised. I will now call this council and committee meeting to order. We will begin with the approval of the agenda and/or the changes to the agenda. The agenda is before you for approval. We have had some changes to this agenda recently. And before I ask for a motion to approve as amended, the clerk has informed me that Councillor Martin has a desire to speak to this motion. So Councillor Martin, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I really struggle with this agenda because a lot of information came in after the fact. I know we're trying to roll with the punches here and do our best with COVID. We're receiving electronic copies instead of copies in print. And, you know, some things are coming in late, but, you know, we're almost at a full year of COVID. And these last amendments and changes to the agenda came in a little hot and heavy. So I'm not actually in favor of approving the agenda as is. I'd like to remove some of these items because if I'm going to be completely honest, I'm not prepared to discuss them all in full. I did not see the email from Owen until this morning and had other commitments on the go. And I was reading the interurban water report again last night. So if I can, Mr. Chair, I'm not prepared to move forward with firstly, the first report was missing Appendix A. That wasn't put online and given enough time for the public to read and carry on. 3B, the summary purchase bids, that probably could push forward with conversation from council, but again, the information wasn't online. I am prepared to talk about the water report today. However, I think it's important to note that that report was not put online until Monday morning for the public to read. Under staff reports and discussion items, 6C, Cockshut Road sidewalk. This was not shared. We received no input from the public, and we know that that was a priority for public community members in Port Dover. I'm not prepared to debate that today. 6E, Norview Lodge, Declaration of Compliance. 6F, Social Services Relief Fund. 6G, Staff Report CIO 2109, Use of Strategic Initiative Fund. With Rogers, I've got a lot of concerns about these last minute items. I'm not prepared to debate them in full. We could pass them and pull them next week, but I don't want to have a debate at council at a final meeting. I'm just not, all in all, not happy with how this agenda came together. Lots of things were sent in our email last minute. And most importantly, we passed a bylaw that items would come Monday at noon to council members, and the email was sent around 3:50 or 4 p.m. last night. So again, I know staff are busy. I know COVID is unprecedented, but I'm not prepared to go through these items, and I wish to defer them until the next CIC meeting. Thank you for letting me speak.
You're welcome, Councillor Martin. Is there any other discussion from council? Councillor Martin has put forward a motion to defer the item mentioned. Is there any discussion about that proposal to defer?
I think you're looking for a seconder, Mr. Chair.
And do I have a seconder?
Councillor Rabbit's here. I am in attendance, and I just want to maybe have the motion reread, please, what we're deferring.
Hi, Councillor Rabbits. Mr. Chair, may I? Or would you like
Yeah,
to?
yes, you may. Councillor Martin, I wonder if it will be helpful for council. You have a couple of items that you are prepared to discuss today if you must, but I wonder if it's possible just to make the list first of the ones that you feel definitely should be deferred and then add the others so that council is clear about which ones it is that they might have issue with.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The ones that I definitely would like to defer would be the new items that came Monday at 3:50 or so, which is the staff report discussion item 6C, Cockshut Road, the sidewalks, 6E, Norview Lodge Declaration of Compliance, 6F, Social Services Relief Fund, 6G, Staff Report CAO 2109. And then I also noted that the first report was missing Appendix A. 3B, the summary purchase bids, that came later and was uploaded online. The water report was not added until Monday. I am prepared to have a discussion on those last mentioned ones. However, I just want to note that all of the information has not been put online for the normal duration it normally would be for the public. And through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Rabbits, I just noted that I know we're trying our best here with COVID and we're getting electronic copies and so on, and stuff comes in late, but I really was struggling to keep up with these items. And if I'm being completely honest, I was reading the interurban water study again yesterday and didn't see the email from Owen updating those last staff reports until this morning. And I had other commitments and phone calls this morning. So I'm not prepared to debate some of these things or pass them and then pull them at the council meeting and have a debate at the council meeting. My request is to simply defer them to the next planning meeting. And we do have a bylaw that we've passed that this information was supposed to come to council members by Monday at noon. And technically, when I actually tabled that motion and asked for items to come 48 hours beforehand, Councillor Van Passen made an amendment and asked if Monday at noon was suitable, and we did vote on that. But when I passed that motion, I guess I should have been more specific. I had in mind supplementary information, presentations and slideshows and things that staff were running behind on, that those things would come to us, not multiple staff reports the day before. So that was kind of the reasoning behind my motion and asking for a deferral.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. And that is the motion. Is there a seconder for that motion?
Councillor Michelle off.
Yes, Madam Mayor, I was going to go to you if we were going to get a seconder.
I'm definitely not seconding that motion, that's for sure.
Okay. Is there a seconder? I have Councillor Huffman to second and some discussion. And now, Madam Mayor, we'll hear from our CAO. Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair, you know, staff never like to rush anything on late. Sometimes it's just timing. For example, staff report CAO 2109, there was a requirement to have that completed prior to February 14th. We've just learned, though, that maybe that program intake has been delayed. That being said, staff is checking with me now. There is some concern if we defer to another CIC, especially for a tender award. I'm trying to get confirmation on the Norview Lodge Declaration of Compliance, whether that is time sensitive. Also, because that was one of the items that were listed. The Social Services Relief Fund Round 2, there is some time sensitivity around that to report back to the ministry. If there was a deferral to next council meeting, that makes some sense, but if it goes to another CIC and if we start missing timelines, that might be difficult. So I'd like to get my staff to confirm on a few items. So if you just give me a minute or two, we'll just do that.
Sure, and for clarity through you, Mr. Chair, for clarity to staff, I don't have, it doesn't need to be a particular date for me. I'm just asking for more time in general to be better prepared. Although like our next council meeting is also a budget meeting, so there might be a couple things on the go in that meeting itself, but I am open to discussion from colleagues on a more suitable date and staff.
And Councillor Martin, to be clear, you would be content if we were to defer this for 1 week to our next council meeting?
I'm hesitant because it is a budget meeting, and I think that that would be quite a long day. But if that's the wishes of my colleagues, and fine, my general concern is to get more time to be prepared to discuss and debate the information at large. But I do think we'll be busy on the 16th. But if that's the best compromise we can get, then I'm open to it.
And Councillor Huffman as a seconder, would you be content with that? Any further discussion?
Mr. Chair, Mike here. I think we're waiting for Mr. Burgess to get back to us, right?
I thought we'd just have some discussion while he was going. Sorry, Councillor. Madam Mayor?
I've just sent Rogers an email to see whether or not they had a February 15th deadline. We just learned about it on Friday when I called you, Mr. Chair. I've just sent them an email to see. It would be an incredible opportunity for Norfolk County to be missed by delaying a report that was simply, they're going to put the application in regardless of whether this council supports them or not. What an unfortunate opportunity to not be able to provide them of a letter of support and potentially making our application even more competitive. It looks like the UBF application may have just been delayed to March, extended 1 month when you look on the federal website. That was not what we were told on Friday. As of Friday, it was February 15th. Which is why it had to be placed on this agenda, which is why we made a phone call to yourself immediately.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Through the chair, I've received a few updates. So for the, we have to file with the ministry prior to March 1st, so they would require council approval prior to March 1st for the Northview Lodge declaration. Social Services, Heidi is saying they could postpone till next week with the council approval on that one. And I believe the mayor just covered off the issue with the application for the federal government. And just to be clear, that application actually requires a letter of support from the municipality for the application to be actually accepted as part of their terms. So I think we do have some time, but again, you couldn't delay this to March because you're going to miss the timelines for those three items. Next week would be acceptable by staff. But
if it assists committee, committee and council gets approved, the minutes get approved next week on the 16th. So all the approvals would technically be on the 16th, and the letters wouldn't be able to go out until after we get council approval on special council meeting on February 16th. Thanks.
Mr. Burgess, just for council's information, the Rogers deadline, the mayor mentioned it's February 15th. Are you suggesting now that we would have until the 16th to do that?
It appears that way. We're also sending a letter of support to another ISP provider for the same program. That one wasn't coming to council because it was just a letter of support. They just emailed me earlier today to say that they had an extension. So this is all, an hour old, this extension information. Okay. So, but it would still all have to be done before the end of the month.
All right, thank you. Councillor Van Passen.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am quite prepared to move forward on the entire agenda as amended, as Councillor can pull them, and I understand her concerns, but we can pull them at council and defer them at that time if there's not enough information Some of them are time sensitive, and no, the system didn't work the way it's supposed to, but sometimes you just got to roll with the punches and take what the life gives you and move on. And I'm quite prepared to do that. So.
Thank you, Councillor Van Passen. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not only am I not prepared to discuss them, my initial point was that I don't want to have to debate them at a council meeting because it is final. So that was why I initially suggested another council and committee meeting. But if the compromise is that I just get some more time to go through it, this information has not come out the way that it normally would. I didn't even receive my agenda at home to read through until Saturday. They usually come on Fridays. And then additional information has come in. I've had lots of emails from community members who weren't able to access information online. It hasn't been online in the normal transparent manner that we would do things. So I'm not prepared to go through these, and I really not think it's appropriate or the way we would normally conduct business to expect us to do this. These they came in yesterday at 4 o'clock, and I'm not going to lie, I'm not prepared to go through them. So I would ask for more time, and if we have to have the debate at a final council meeting, then that's the reality of it, and that's where I'm willing to compromise. But this is not the way that we have done every other package, especially over the last year in the throes of COVID. So I would like a deferral on these items.
Councillor Rabbits.
Thank you, and through you, apologies for being late to this meeting, but I did want to speak on the matter of the deferral. I am of the same opinion as my colleague, Councillor Van Passen, that I would like to deal with the agenda as amended. Anything that's of a time-sensitive nature, I would try to, I'd rather, why put off for tomorrow what we can accomplish today is sort of my thought process on this. And if we can get an executive summary or an introduction on these topics from our dedicated and qualified staff, that may hopefully fill in any knowledge gaps that may exist due to a lack of time to read in and dig into the weeds on some of these topics. So I want to try to deal with it today. If through the course of our debate we get to the point where we honestly really feel like there is some information lacking, maybe we can cross that bridge at that juncture. But from what I've heard, I won't be supporting the deferral. It would be duplicitous of me also not to mention that I unfortunately do have to send my regrets for our meeting on the 16th at 9 a.m. When attempting to book this time off of work, unfortunately, the day after Family Day. It's a busy week for myself at the factory, and it turned out to be likely the worst time and date on my calendar in February. So, I won't be able to attend. I want to get that out of the way before we get into voting on the matter. I'm not suggesting that I don't want to defer because I unfortunately won't be able to attend that meeting. I do want to defer because I want to see how much of the agenda we can pay as it was amended. So all cards on the table. I won't be supporting the deferral. For the reasons that I've stated. Unfortunately, I also won't be able to attend on the 16th. If we want to look to rescheduling at the end of our meeting today, that would be appreciated. Otherwise, this group's got my confidence to make those important decisions without my attendance on that date. So thank you for the opportunity to speak on those two matters.
And is there any other discussion regarding the motion to defer? Does anyone need to have those items that Councillor Martin has moved repeated, or is everyone content? In that event, then, Mr. Clerk, I believe that we have established a pattern on virtual meetings of recorded votes. Are we going to proceed with that?
Okay, yeah, we can proceed with that. I just didn't have any sheets because it's not a council and committee practice normally, but I can go screen by screen here and call out your name.
That might assist because not everyone is pinned to my screen, Mr. Clerk, so that will, I think, be helpful, unless one of my colleagues has an objection to that. Hearing none. Kevin, you may proceed.
Okay, Councillor Van Passen,
No.
sorry, it's gonna take a little bit long because I have to write down your name while I check your vote. Councillor Columbus,
Yes.
Councillor Martin,
Yes.
Councillor Rabbits,
No.
Councillor Taylor,
No.
Councillor Huffman,
Yes.
Mayor Chop,
No.
and Chair Michele.
Yes.
Motion is defeated on a tie.
Councillor Martin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to be clear, we are in conflict with our own procedural bylaw, and I will, on each individual report after they're adopted when we get to them, to move for deferral, because again, for the third time, I'm not prepared to debate them in full. They were sent to us late, and the public has not been given enough time with the information online the way that we normally transparently do information. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councillor Martin. Then we'll move on to declarations of pecuniary interest. Are there any such declarations from council?
Mr. Chair, I think we still have to pass the agenda.
I'm sorry, Madam Mayor, forgive me. You're right. Then can I have a motion to pass the agenda? Councillor Van Passen. And a seconder. Councillor Columbus. And I think we can do this with a show of hands, hopefully. All in favor? Okay. That, Mr. Clerk, you may have to assist me here. I'm not sure that we had a majority to pass this agenda.
Do you want to do another recorded vote?
In the absence of my certainty that we had 5 affirmative votes to pass the agenda, I believe we're going to have to.
Okay, I've got sheets this time, so it'll be faster. So
Okay.
Okay, Councillor Rabbits,
Yes.
Councillor Columbus,
Yes.
Councillor Martin,
No.
Councillor Van Passen,
Yes.
Councillor Huffman,
No.
Councillor Michele,
Yes.
Councillor Taylor,
Yes.
Mayor Chop.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Now I think we can go on to ask if there are any declarations of pecuniary interest from council members. Seeing none, then we will move on. We have some consent items. We actually have two consent items.
Oh, sorry, Tom. I raised my hand there.
I'm sorry,
Um,
Councillor Taylor, and I'm so sorry. Because I can't pin you to the screen, I did see your hand raised, and I'm sorry. Please proceed.
Oh, no problem. I would like to declare a perceived conflict of interest on 10A, as they have become recent patients of mine.
Okay, Mr. Clerk, if you'll note that, please. Thank you. And with regard to the two consent items, if there is a desire to pull either one, we'll discuss it after we hear the deputations. And if not, I may have a motion to approve them both as presented. Any desire by council to pull either of the consent items? Seeing none, then we will move forward to our deputation. I understand we have Mr. Jim Dover with us today.
Chair Michelle, we need a motion to approve the consent items.
Okay, so I see. I'm sorry, Mr. Clerk. Thank you. Then can I have a motion to approve the consent items? Councillor Van Passen. And a seconder. Councillor Columbus. And all in favor? Mr. Clerk, I may need your assistance again. I am not certain that we have a majority.
From my count, correct me if I'm wrong, it was a majority of 6-2.
Thank you. Unless council objects, I will accept that as the official vote on that motion. And I believe now that we can go to Mr. Dover. Good afternoon, Mr. Dover. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay,
are you able to hear me?
And I can hear you very well, and we can see you. Thank you. Mr. Dover, just a reminder that deputations have a limit of 5 minutes. And when you are ready to begin, I will start that time at the 4-minute mark. I will do my best to remind you that you have 1 minute remaining. And when you are ready, I am ready.
Well, thank you. I'm the Vice President of the Port Dover Waterfront Preservation Association. And our association is a not-for-profit corporation dedicated to the preservation and enhancement of all aspects of the Port Dover waterfront and harbor. And one of our purposes is to advocate for the community's physical and visual access to our waterfront. My understanding is that we've been invited to present our association's vision related to the development of Port Dover's waterfront. But we are to refrain from commenting directly on matters currently before the local planning appeal tribunal. We appreciate having been provided this opportunity to address council, and thank you. Nevertheless, we must state that we are before you today on a without prejudice basis to any position our association may take on any matter currently before the appeal tribunal. We also trust that our presentation will not prevent us from addressing council in the future on any specific matter related to the waterfront development. The term waterfront needs to be defined. To some, it means just the Port Dover beach, harbor, and pier, as well as the Lake Erie shoreline. However, when our association discusses waterfront, we're also referring to the Lynn River, including Silver Lake and its wetland, all the way up to Ivy's Dam, as well as Black Creek up to and including the Black Creek Conservation Area. As you know, much of our waterfront, as we're defining it, is privately owned. This reality requires collaboration between property owners, Norfolk County, and residents. Our association has two project visions related to the waterfront. The first is the revitalization of Silver Lake and its wetland, and Council made a significant contribution to our vision when it repaired Meisner Dam. Thanks to Meisner Dam will continue to protect the Lynn River and Port Dover Harbor from silt buildup, and residents now have a much improved view of the Lynn River. Together with the Lions Club, we've begun to organize the community to revitalize Silver Lake. Phase 1 of the project is being led by our association, and just this past Sunday, the project steering committee, consisting of representatives from various local organizations, including the Long Point World Biosphere Reserve Foundation, held its first meeting. Our second project vision is what we are calling the Lighthouse Trail, a waterfront trail connecting the lighthouse north to the Lynn Valley Trail, which ends in Silver Lake Park. Just like the Lynn Valley Trail was connected piece by piece north to the Waterfront Heritage Trail. And just like the Lynn Valley Trail Association, our vision is that a group of volunteers will lead this project in cooperation with property owners and local government. If we were starting fresh, this would be so easy. However, we're not. We must respect property owners and developers who wish to earn a fair return on their investment. They are part of the solution. However, at the same time, property owners and developers must respect our community's desire, as expressed in Section 6.5.2 of Norfolk County's official plan, that, and I'm going to quote, "The policies of the plan shall promote public accessibility to the shorelines and to, from, and within the area through the possible establishment of a boardwalk and/or waterfront promenade." An attractive and inviting waterfront community is in everyone's interest. This goal should unite us. There will be times when we become frustrated as we strive for our project visions. But community groups like ours, residents, Norfolk County staff and council, as well as developers and property owners, should keep in mind our past collective successes, such as the Port Dover Harbor Marina, Riverfront Park, Meisner Dam, Silver Lake Park, and the Port House Heritage designation. In conclusion, I don't think it's an overstatement to say that the decisions this council make related to waterfront development will be this council's legacy. However, we all need to keep in mind that appropriate development can only be achieved if all stakeholders work together in an open, transparent fashion in accordance with the goals expressed in Norfolk County's official plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dover. That was excellent timing. And are there any questions of Mr. Dover regarding his deputation today by council? And
Mr. Chair, I don't know if you can see me, Councillor Martin. I have a question.
I'm just seeing you now, Councillor Martin. Thank you. I had to switch screens there. I think we are ready. Go ahead.
No problem. Thank you very much. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Dover. Thanks for your presentation today. Kind of off topic, probably for the reason why you're here, but I wondered if you were able to comment more on the boardwalk and the concept of the waterfront trail down by the actual pier, because it appears as though a missing chunk of land.
Well, I understand that there will be a walkway behind Dover Wharf. So there will be a section from the lighthouse straight through to the lift bridge, with one very small exception. There's what I would describe as a shack in about I don't know if it's even a 20-yard property, that presents an impediment.
Yeah, it's thanks. It's I guess it wasn't really a question, more of a statement, but it's recently come to my attention that that's like a big flaw in the plan, to no fault of your own or Norfolk County specifically, but that seems like it's pretty critical. We should iron that out, and I know Norfolk County staff are are looking at it. If I could jump over to your first initiative, the revitalization of the lake. So is it the hope that there would be, walking trails surrounding the lake and then connecting through with these, some waterfront locations to get us all the way down to the pier, or what is the vision?
We see that there's two options from the end of the Lynn Valley Trail to either Meisner Dam or Chapman Street. To get to Meisner Dam, the infilling that takes place along the shoreline may enable, if we work with the property owners, for a walkway along the infilled portion. And owners is Norfolk County. Another option is to go through straight to Chapman Street. However, again, there's a block there possibly. And we have walked these sections with the general manager from planning and development. And he has suggested that we mark it out on a map and come in and speak with planning staff. So we're in the process of doing that. But then there's the other segment from Meisner Dam through to the lift bridge. And we know that already the developer of the Gamble Shipyard property has stated that he's open to public access along that rather significant piece of property. But there obviously remains one other blockage.
Thank you very much.
And I believe we had another question from Councillor Rabbits, or I'm sorry, Mayor Chop.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jim, I think we have to understand that what's happened with the other development project could be up in the air. Nothing's been finalized there in terms of the boardwalk and so on. Could you rate for me, I guess maybe speak a little bit on the height component of what you vision along the river, and rate for me in order of importance, height versus public walkway, some of the other things that you might envision along there in terms of the priorities that you see?
Well, what I can do is I can talk about visual access. And I think Dover Wharf has helped us visualize the impact of a 6 and 8 story building on our waterfront. There was a time when you could stand at Norfolk on Main Street, in front of Norfolk Tavern, and you could look out over the commercial harbor. But this view's now lost to all but a few tenants of this building. There will be, though, a walkway through the river that will be open to the public. I guess the question becomes, was this enough compensation? Some people will say no, others might agree that it was. But what I'm saying, the way I'm trying to answer your question there, Chop, is that each development is going to have to be considered separately. And different design alternatives are going to have to be considered, such as setbacks, tiered stories, angled construction so there can be a view of the waterfront. That's just a few examples. But the public's physical and visual access to the waterfront must be at the top of the priority list. And that, under normal circumstances, we always talk about street visual. However, Port Dover is a waterfront community, and there's boats going up and down the Lynn River and Black Creek. And if you could just imagine developments like the Dover Wharf all along the Lynn River, it'd be like running a gauntlet. And so the development is piecemeal, and each decision on each proposed development will set a precedent for the next development. So council, when making these decisions, has to look in the horizon. And if we make this decision today, what impact will it have for future development? And so that's why we're saying this is legacy, And that's why we've all got to work together to come up with compromise and figure out solutions to maximize. But each case will be different.
Thank you, Jim. And Councillor Rabbits.
Thank you, and through you, my question for Jim. Jim, thank you for your deputation today. And my questions are really just general policy related questions. The first part of my question to you is in relation to some of the language that we have in our bylaws about public access to the waterfront being recommended, being preferred, this language that is somewhat non-committal and non-binding, but definitely the intent there, you see that it is desirable to have access to the waterfront. I wanted to hear from you if you find that some of this language to be problematic, and perhaps you might have a suggestion on how to improve that. And the second part to my question would be, do you have any examples, or in your research, do you know of municipalities that have more binding language, such as public access to the waterfront is required or is mandated? And I'd be interested if you have any examples, and perhaps you can't answer this today, but it might be some good fodder for a future deputation, about examples in municipalities that maybe use more direct language that makes access to the waterfront required or mandatory, as opposed to being a preferred or a desirable outcome without any real teeth to it. I'll let you have a chance to answer that, and then I just want to get your perspective on POPs, publicly owned, privately serviced access points, if you have some knowledge to share with this council.
If I don't answer all of your questions, just ask again. On the question, we haven't done research on that language issue in the policy. However, I will commit to do that because I think it's a very good point. We have been participating in the Port Dover Secondary Plan review, and we've had 2 meetings, and we've actually met with the consultant briefly, and we've spoken to the General Manager of Planning and Development regarding our concerns. And we will continue to do that because we continue to be concerned that whether our views are being heard on this point, because right now waterfront in the plan is only defined up to Meisner Dam. It does not apply to above Meisner Dam to Ivy Dam, nor does it apply to up Black Creek to Long Point Conservation Area. And when Councillor Columbus, when the consultant updated council, he asked whether that there was going to be he used the word deep dive into Silver Lake in terms of for the secondary plan. We were very concerned when the consultant said they were looking for staff direction on as to whether even to look at that. So we're wanting to advocate and promote that there be consideration. And you've identified a very one of the issues that we're trying to find out. How do we, if the community is going to do all this effort to revitalize Silver Lake, and I'm talking about raising a lot of money over 5-10 years, there's a lot of effort, only to have developers then buy up the property along Silver Lake. And by the way, that's already happening. Bids are being made on property. Norfolk County owns Public Works Yard. They could sell it. And then we could have a development on there and a developer asking for an exemption, and the public has lost access. So we have to find some way to guarantee that, and we've had some preliminary discussions with the General Manager of Planning and Economic Development about how could we do that. And one other option that we see open to us, especially as it applies to Silver Lake Park, our conservation agreements. That might be a way. So we're exploring different ways and want to do that. Now, you also asked about POPs. I don't know the term very well, but I think it stands for, could you help me with the acronym of public?
Publicly owned, privately serviced. So,
Okay.
In a sense, I suppose it's sort of like an easement, or hopefully I'm not getting my language mixed up, but owned, but it is privately serviced property, providing an access point.
Yeah, there's all kinds of different options, but take a look at Silver Lake Park right now. That's not a county park. That was developed by the Port Dover Lions Club, and it's open to the whole public. They operate it, they maintain it. My goodness, they even pay taxes on it. So there's an example of a community group making a significant contribution. Let's work with the developers to do that. Let's work with the county to do that with other properties. We're open to that.
Thank you for that, Jim. And I do intend to go back to staff after asking you these questions. Just make sure I got the acronym right. I could actually have it exactly backwards. Perhaps it's privately owned and publicly serviced. But, You could take that acronym two ways. I think the main point of me asking you about it is just really to get your perspective on these access points and to see what research you've come up with to date. I don't want to ask you a question. I'm trying to be delicate here because we do have some LPAT before us, and I really don't want to get into that here. My intent was, I just want to comment that the correspondence that you've had with Paula Butis is healthy and good. We'll leave it at that, and I think I want to encourage your group to have similar dialogue with our planning department, because when setting policy, I think there's a real opportunity there for us to get some feedback. I'm not a subject matter expert in planning, and I rely on our qualified and dedicated staff, but I don't want to necessarily have them do all the heavy lifting. If we can get some help from our volunteer organizations to develop better policy, that's something I want to champion, and that's something I would like to pursue. So maybe I'll just allow you to have some parting comments in response, and we can move on to my colleagues.
Thank you. Another example is Riverfront Park. I don't know if a lot of people are aware, but that was initiated by the community, in particular Ed Levins with Bridge Marine. And over $100,000 was raised from the community to develop that park. That's right beside Harbor Museum. And that was done with the assistance of Norfolk County. So there's another example where the community came together with Norfolk County, and created a lovely setting down in Port Dover Harbor.
And Mayor Cha.
Nothing further, Councilman.
Thank you, Councilor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to comment that I'm receiving some messages that viewers at home can't see the screen. They can hear, but it's only showing an empty council chambers. So Kevin could take a look at that. Thank you.
Thank you. And perhaps further to that, for council's information, I have you all on the screen in front of me now, so we are all together. Thank you.
For the public, you can hear we're just going through some live feed technical issues. Councilors can see each other and can continue without any technical issues. The live feed went down, and when we were trying to spotlight our deputation, Mr. Dover there. So we're working on behind the scenes to get it back up and running. Apologies for the inconvenience.
Thank you, Kevin. And Councilor Columbus, did you have something?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I did. I wanted to ask Mr. Dover if he could share some information with respect to the organization that he represents. How many members do you have? Who are you sanctioned by? Like, what is your, are you a nonprofit corporation or?
Hi, something just happened. This is just the clerk to the public. Something has happened and we're working on fixing it. And please stand by. Thank you for your patience.
We were also very actively involved with the advocating for the repair of Meister Dam. Just some of the projects we've been involved with.
Thanks very much.
Any other questions of the deputation by council? Seeing none, Mr. Dover, thank you very much for your presentation and the responses you've given to council.
Thank you very much.
Now, may I have a motion to receive the deputation as information? Councillor Martin, second. Councillor Columbus. I think we can do this visually. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. We have, moving on our agenda, we have one communication today from Catherine Schonberger regarding Ward 2. Is there a committee member who would wish to speak to it? Seeing none, we will move forward. May I have a motion to see correspondence from Catherine Schonberger regarding Ward 2 as information? Councillor Rabbit, seconded by Councillor Taylor. All in favor? Thank you. That is carried. We'll move on to presentations. And just a quick reminder, although I'm not sure that they will need it, but to presenters, you have 10 minutes in total to present. I will try my best to remind you when you are getting near the end of your presentation. And also a reminder for everyone to leave your microphones on mute when you are not speaking. Thank you. And we will begin with first presentation, CAO 21-08, regarding the vacant seat in Ward 2. I believe Mr. Grosel will be making that presentation and giving his report. Andy, are you prepared to do that today?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chair Michele. I'd first like to start off by thanking the residents of Ward 2 who've shown a lot of interest in the process of filling this vacant seat. Some have contacted me with a desire to have this process expedited. Elections are...
I do believe that the council chamber's microphone is muted.
Sorry. Oh.
For staff's information.
Can you hear me now? Hello? Hello? Can you hear me? I'm on. Jacob, can you hear me? Is there...
Andy, council can hear you.
Oh, you can hear me? Okay, great. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair Michele. I'd first like to start off by thanking the residents of Ward 2 who've shown a lot of interest in the process of filling this vacant seat. Some have contacted me with a desire to have this process expedited. I always compare elections to a 5,000-piece jigsaw puzzle in their complexity. So at the outset, you want to make sure that you are flipping all the pieces the right way over and that you line up all the edge pieces. And that's what we've been doing kind of over the last month on both potential options for committee's consideration. Those two options are to appoint somebody to the seat or run a by-election. There is no option to leave the seat vacant unless it occurs within 90 days of a regular election voting day. So council has to execute one of these options. Additionally, council is required to make a decision upon either prior to March 20th. So in terms of the appointment process, That would be a final bylaw appointing a Ward 2 councillor. And in terms of a by-election, that would be a bylaw to call a by-election before March 20th. The appointment process, just to highlight that if anyone who is a resident or non-resident elector of Norfolk County is eligible for appointment, excluding those that don't meet one of the requirements outlined on pages 1 and 2 of the draft application on the report. So there's a number of lists. You can't be a judge, you can't be a clerk, you can't be a municipal employee, those types of exemptions, and you have to be over 18. You can't be incarcerated at the time of filing papers. So those are some of the potential limitations. To go through some of the advantages of the appointment process, it will see the Ward 2 seat filled on March 10th. Less county resources are required. That's something that would probably help out council services quite a bit. It can be conducted in a transparent manner to provide residents with understanding of council's decision-making, and it avoids an election during a pandemic. The disadvantages is that incumbency is considered to be a significant advantage. There's nothing that a council can do to prevent somebody from running in the next regular election. So there is no, even if somebody says they're just going to run, take the appointment for a year and a half, there really isn't anything that you can do to stop them from putting their name in. You could end up with 2 candidates that are too close to call, or no candidates that are ideal for the position. There's no established process, only commonly applied norms by municipalities. So council could essentially appoint anybody who is an eligible elector to be in the seat. And council opens themselves up to potential criticism for the final selection. So that's part of the reason to have some transparency in your process, to make sure that people are aware of the decision-making considerations. Some advantages of the by-election is that it's the democratic process ensures that the correct candidate is selected. There's no questioning that. It may increase voter turnout and engagement for Ward 2, which is historically the lowest turnout of about 26% of electors, which is really low. Provides an opportunity to try different voting options, such as pre-registered mail-in ballots. We wanted to try pre-registered mail-in ballots for the 2022 election, and one of the areas that we wanted to have this occur was Ward 2. They have a very kind of diverse rural population. They have some low German population, so we thought the low-tech method of voting for them may increase their voter turnout next election. The disadvantages are obviously the longer timeline. There's nothing that can be done to remove the requirements for nomination forms. So you can see on the proposed procedures, we're recommending that only one person sign on each form to limit contact points, but you'd still have the requirement for 25 signatures, and that's going to send people door to door. And there's nothing that we can do to remove that. The province has introduced one regulation related to elections during the pandemic, and that is been strangely enough to remove ranked balloting. So it isn't really relevant, but it doesn't appear like they're going to make any further changes for elections. It's resource-heavy enterprise for clerks. Another disadvantage is the accuracy of the MPAC mailers list. The list will be amended for 2024. After 16 years of trying, AMCTO was finally successful in getting the commitment from the province to get rid of that list. But it means that we're still dealing with a list that's based on the tax roll, not on driver's license information. So it will be a challenge for any by-elections and as well for the next regular election. And voter turnout can be low in a by-election if people are disengaged. There are some election timelines that you have there. These timelines would be changed if the by-election is called at in March. So the election date of May 31st would have you approving the bylaw for a by-election on next week, and that would mean that we'd be accepting nominations starting next week. So those are the election timelines, and if you look also, we have hybrid approaches here. The hybrid approach that we are suggesting, normally a council is chosen to, has to pick one option or the other, but we're suggesting preparing the bylaws for a by-election in case council does decide to proceed with an appointment process, and that would allow, if you don't have a candidate that you can agree upon on March 9th, then you could proceed to do a by-election still. There would be time for it, but the timelines would be adjusted. And then there's also the option to just appoint an individual without any selection process. So it is completely appropriate if committee had a name in their mind that they could just decide on that person today, and we'd present a bylaw next week to appoint them. So there is a lot of latitude with appointments. And with that, I'll try my best to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Andy. Questions of committee? I see Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I had my hand up there because I don't know about anyone else, but I never see any presentations on my screen. My screen is black, and I did follow along with it in my agenda because it was given to us in hard copy, which is great, but just, I don't know if that's just me or anyone else. So, Andy, I have asked you a couple of these questions, but to clear the air for the public, first and foremost, can you talk about, if council goes the appointment route, what the kind of unwritten rule is, the unspoken rule about not running again? There isn't a hard and fast rule on this, but can you elaborate on that, please, for the public?
Through you, Chair Michelle. Yes, so it is common for councils to make it known that they only want somebody to fill out the remainder of the term. Sometimes that can lead to councils appointing retired politicians or people who have previous experience. As I went through a process like that in Hamilton after, unfortunately, one of our councillors passed away. So that is common, but you know, you can get them to say anything that you want. They can pledge that they won't run again, but there's nothing in legislation that you can do to stop that. So, and there is, I mean, certainly this term of council is the exception to the rule where incumbency wasn't an advantage in the last election, but oftentimes it is said that incumbency is a large advantage in many elections.
Right, so it's just, it is not a hard and fast rule, you know, when you are running, but I guess the logic is that through appointment you would be given this additional experience and have the upper hand. Should you decide to run again, you would have an advantage because you'd be looked at as an incumbent. So typically through appointment, people usually jump into this role when they don't wish to fulfill another full term. Is that fair to say?
Through you, Chair Michelle, I'd suggest that normally the process is determined more upon where you are in the term of council. So last year, almost any council would have appointed through a by-election. After March 31st of 2022, you can't actually even do a by-election. Your only option is an appointment. So it's kind of where you are in the term is what determines more so what process you would use. So initially in January, I wrote a memo recommending a by-election, but certainly it's a pandemic. An election is a lot of work, so it is certainly, staff aren't taking a strong position either way on whatever process council would want to undertake.
Okay, so just to clear it up for the public, you can, if council goes the appointment route and you are appointed, you are eligible to run again in the upcoming election and campaign as any other candidate would. However, it's kind of an unwritten rule that you wouldn't, because you're given this extra experience municipally that would leverage you as an incumbent. But there is no rule. You can run for appointment and again campaign. My next question for you, for the public record, to clear it up, through the chair to the clerk, Andy, are you permitted to run if you don't live in that ward?
Through you, Chair Michelle, yes. So just like a regular election, you can run as long as you're an elector of Norfolk County. So you could actually have a secondary residence in Norfolk County, not even in that ward. So I could own a cottage in Long Point and run in Ward 2.
Okay, thank you. My next question to you, would it be appropriate, there's a lot of commentary from constituents in some emails and on social media about the easiest and the most logical thing to do would be to go to the, would it be appropriate for us to do our due diligence and connect with that individual or even the runner-up of the runner-up and have them include some type of written just whether they're interested or not, so that we're not just saying, hey, so-and-so sent a text message to Councillor Michelli saying he wanted the role and he was the runner-up. Should we not clear that up for the public record and have some kind of written statement from those candidates?
Through you, Chair Michelli. So there's, for the appointment process, there's no hard and fast rules. The only thing that I'd suggest is all of you council members signed up for a part-time job, and I'm sure for none of you this feels like a part-time job most days. And so I would want to make sure that anybody who was willing to take on the role of Ward 2 councillor truly understood the magnitude of the time commitment required for this role. It is, you know, a lowly paid job, and there are multiple contacts for it. So it is a very difficult and challenging role. So you know, that's what I'd suggest council make sure anybody who put their name forward was cognizant of.
Okay, thank you. I'm just suggesting that maybe that is something that the public would be interested in. Is the runner-up candidate interested, yes or no? And they should publicly document that, potentially with sending a letter to the clerk's department. I guess the only other thing I'm, you know, in general, thanks for this presentation, Andy, and the information. It's very helpful to see. I like the idea of filling the seat sooner rather than later. And so, you know, for council to make its own hybrid method, you know, could that include kind of many facets of what you've talked about? An application that's submitted through public forum, printed in the agenda, council members potentially doing an interview in a council meeting on the public agenda, asking, you know, the same 3 questions of a candidate if we wanted to go the appointment route, letting them speak with an opening statement, a closing statement, and then deferring for a week or 2 to give the public some time to chime in. It's not a traditional election route, that's for sure. Council would still be going with an appointment strategy, but it would get as close to campaigning in COVID as possible and try to be as transparent and open with the information as possible. Is something like that realistic?
Through you, Chair Michelli. Yes, I'd suggest that is realistic. Certainly, given the short time frame between now and March 19th, if committee gives us kind of firm direction that they want to pursue an appointment process, we would proceed with the application that's attached here and go to do advertising and publication on our website. It's one of those issues where we probably wouldn't wait for council's final approval next week, just to make sure that we had as long as possible an application period for people.
Okay, thank you very much. My only final comments are I can't see Mayor Chop or Councillor Taylor. The camera's on my screen, but thank you. Those are all my questions for now.
Thank you, Councillor Rabbits. I was muted there. Thank you very much. You are my next speaker, followed by Councillor Van Passen, then Councillor Columbus. Thank you. Councillor Rabbits, now you have committed the same sin. Please unmute.
Thank you for interrupting. I wasn't looking at your screen. I was looking at some notes. Appreciate that. And through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for helping me with my technical difficulties. I know I'm there for you and for all my colleagues on council. But, you know, I'm looking at this and I am somewhat struggling that the last election, you know, information from that election wasn't necessarily presented as an option. It sounds like it's baked in to an appointment process if council were to choose to go that route, you know, but I'm looking at an election in 2018 and trying to figure out 2021, how, you know, the voice of the people then is somehow invalidated years later. And I'm thinking about the runner-up number 2 or 3 if either person were willing to take on the role. They haven't been solicited to my knowledge. I think I'm really looking for a little bit of information from that election. Unfortunately, I would have pulled up some statistics here, but I'm only having one screen, and I'll lose some capability if I go off screen here. But I would like to know how many electors are in Ward 2, how many participated in the election, and who they voted for, and who those candidates were that put their name forward. Because I think it's relevant for our discussion. And I think it'll be relevant for any subsequent appointment process if we choose to go that route. In my view, these folks paid their dues. Literally, they gave some money forward and got some back and ran a campaign, right? They saw it through to election day, and they had their name on a ballot. And, I want to hear more about, really the results of 2018 before I make a decision. Because I think it's important. And, we went door to door already. We got 25 signatures on a bunch of nomination papers. And, from my feeling where I sit, we did this already in a way. I know times have changed. A lot's changed on council. But I kind of want to take us back to 2018. And I was hoping the report might have had a little bit more of that content. Can you share some information about our past election and how that could impact our decision today, Andy?
Sure. Of course. Thank you, Councillor Ravitz. Ward 2, the 2018 election, there were 1,598 ballots cast out of a potential 5,932 electors. So that was a 26.9% voter turnout. Our lowest, we average, I believe, around 42% over the municipality, which is fairly good for a municipality. Not as good as we always lag behind federal and provincial elections for some reason. Of those votes, Roger Geisens obviously got 720. Matt DeVos got 582, and Joe Murphy got 276. So you'd go Roger, Matt, Joe would be the kind of order that they came in. And Matt was only behind by 138 votes from Roger.
Councillor Van Passen and Councillor Ravitz, are you through? Councillor Van Passen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and through you to the clerk. Just one question. If we decided to run a by-election at our next council meeting, is May 31st the earliest possible date for a voting day?
That was a date that I worked out. Potentially, it could be somewhat earlier. There is some statutory timeline. So voting day has to be 45 days from the close of nominations, right? But the clerk themselves sets the nomination date within a certain time period. So technically, it could be somewhat earlier, but you're talking like a week or two. Nothing really too tangible. And part of the reason for that is we need to get the voters list from MPAC, and we need to do the work on making sure that the voters list is correct, and then sending out those ballot kits. Those all take time, and to get those arrangements in place, you wouldn't want to rush it too much more.
Okay, thank you, because I think I brought this up before that, for a largely agricultural community, May is not the best time for an election, but if that's the quickest as possible, then, and with the mail-in ballots, that potentially could help that situation, I think. So thanks very much.
And Councillor Columbus.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know what other members of council are hearing, but from what I hear in communication with members of Ward 2 residents, they would have liked to seen this position filled yesterday. They feel that they should have had somebody at the budget table, which obviously was not possible. But that's what I've been hearing. And I spoke to the runner-up to Councillor Geisens last night. He is informed me that he's certainly not interested in pursuing this. Other commitments that have come on stream for his life at this time, and he indicated that he was not interested. Spoke to the other applicant also, and he was of the mind that if he did take it on, that he would not be able to put his name forward in the 2022 election. So I haven't heard anything back. Perhaps Mr. Grizel may have had a communication from him on that. I don't know.
Thank you, Councillor Columbus. And I'm just going to add that those comments you just related to were actually in the media about 3 weeks ago as well. So I think people, knew that the second and third candidates were probably not going to be able to do this, although it sounds like the third candidate may be able to participate in this should council move to a appointment process.
Just to add, I do have some difficulty with pursuing the election process, being that we are in COVID and it's going to cost somewhere between $22,000 and $33,000 from what the report says here. So I think we should look at the appointment process in one way or another to fill that seat. Thanks.
I'm seeing Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, I'm falling into a similar mindset there where I don't think we can justify an election during COVID. We're asking so many people to, follow protocols, and then to ask people to go door to door. Just I can't support that. And I also think we need to do this sooner rather than later. So a very open appointment process is where I'm going to be leaning. Thank you.
Councillor Hoffman.
Thank you, Councillor Michelli. Through you, quick question for Andy. First, do you know if those two, even though Councillor Columbus said that he's spoken to Mr. DeVos, my question is, do we know if the second and third place finishers filed their expenses claimed?
That's a good question. Yes, I believe both of them did.
Okay.
Usually I'd note somebody that doesn't.
Okay. All right. I was just going to say, because that would be very short and simple, because if they didn't, then we wouldn't be able to consider them going forward. I just want to kind of piggyback on Councillor Columbus and Councillor Taylor's comments. I think the budget process was a prime indicator that we are lacking representation in Ward 2. And it's we need to get this filled sooner, much sooner than later. Again, I can't justify the cost that's involved and the possible, breaking of some COVID protocols. But most importantly, it's the timeline. I just don't see it prudent to be waiting until August to have someone in that chair. I feel that it's very important, especially for this ward, as we know that they do border another area, and it's very important that they are kept at the forefront, Norfolk, and they have representation at the table. So I will full-heartedly be supporting a very open process in terms of an appointment. Thank you.
And Mayor Chop.
Thank you, Councillor Michelli. I think I'm actually of the opposite mind. I understand there is a cost involved with this. I don't think it's an extreme cost. I recognize the easiest thing to do would be to have a by-election, but I think it was the words earlier that maybe we've traditionally seen Ward 2 disengaged in the past. I think it's quite the opposite now. I think they are quite engaged right now. And I do think that, them ensuring they have, I think I heard it last I think I spread it on Twitter from Councillor Martin. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time to get things right. And I think it's important for Ward 2 that they have a representative that they themselves have elected, as opposed to council being on the hook for who ultimately is appointed. And yes, it's going to take a couple months. But it's a couple months, and then it's a democratic process. They have decided who their representative will be, and that takes it out of council's hands. And for myself, given what we have seen transpire over the past 2 years with conflict with the West, I think it's really important that they have whoever they have chosen to represent them.
Thank you, Mayor Chop. Councillor Rabbits.
Thank you, through you. I'm listening to my colleagues here, and the reason I brought up that last election, and I just kind of wanted to ground us with where we started and where we arrived at today. I'm very glad that Councillor Columbus had taken the initiative to go and speak with those past electors. Because that's really good information, and that's basically what kind of what I was getting at, that I wish I had in the report, to see if they had been solicited, what their opinions were, where we're at. With that knowledge and listening to what Mayor Chop has proposed, I am a little torn. While I want this to happen quickly and transparently, now I'm sort of questioning how strong a mandate this person would have if we were to go through an appointment process. And especially if we were to perhaps rely on someone that had a marginal collection of the vote at the time. I'm trying to think of what's a strong mandate for this future leader for Ward 2. And I'm sort of making this calculation in my head that it seems like the democratic approach, the election approach, would give this person the strongest mandate, would be the right decision. That's sort of my moral compass, or that seems to be where I'm arriving. And so with that, I think I move that we move forward with an electoral process. I just really want to hear from our staff to see, is there anything that we can do as decision makers, as your council, to support you further in making this any more expeditious or less of a burden in terms of soliciting this ward. Is there any other bullets you've got for us, or any other leverage that we could perhaps put into the final motion that would assist you in any way? I would like to move that we move forward with an electoral process, but I want to get a little bit more information before we seek out that seconder, because I think it would assist.
Through the chair, I'll take this, and the clerk may add to it. But from staff's point of view, we think we have a sufficient budget to do that. I think, I think traditionally the challenge in this ward has been voter turnout, but that could also be because of the fact you had a very long-term incumbent in that ward. So. If we do go to the election route, I think with any good democracy, it's always good for existing councillors to promote the election as best they can to make sure that there is voter engagement. There would be a bit of education process to this election because of the new processes put in place for COVID, mail-in ballot, that kind of stuff. So I think we could certainly, with our communications team, have you guys also support any communication efforts out there if that's a decision that council has made. We would take Councillor Van Passen's viewpoint in stride, and we'd work with the clerk to narrow that timeline down, because I think based upon everyone in council, the quicker the better. So we'd look to make that as quickly as possible, but then that also increases the emphasis that's required on communicating out to the public exactly what's required for them to do. And then, no matter which way we go with this, onboarding a new councillor midstream is always difficult, and I would, the ask would be that, as far as the onboarding process, staff and council can both participate in that process to get them onboarded as quickly as possible. I don't know if the clerk has anything else to add, if Andy has anything else to add.
No, I'd just say I'd agree with Mr. Burgess. The only thing is it certainly is a lot of resource requirements for. It's a big project and undertaking for council services. So anything council can do, less special meetings, anything like that always helps. We've just come out of a lot of special meetings for the budget. So just resetting and going to our 3 meetings a month would help out the council services staff a lot in planning and being able to deliver the election. And also, I mean, certainly it's going to be a learning experience for Kevin. Having an acting clerk for an election is a bit of a different scenario. I know him and Owen will be able to do the election. I just know the clerk's office, myself and Stephanie Godby, I had 3 elections under me, Stephanie had 2. You're going now to, Kevin doesn't have any elections under him. I know he can do it, but Owen's the only one with previous election experience now in our office. So it is a bit of a change, but it is a small election. It's a good one to start out with.
Sorry, through the chair. Oh, I apologize, Chair. I just wanted to add to Andy's point that staff are looking at the potential, if that is the route selected, we may onboard a temporary person to support clerks with previous election experience just to help out that if that's the decision made. So we've already been putting some feelers out for that.
And thank you, Mr. Burgess. I'm just going to exercise a little bit of my prerogative as chair. I did have a question for Andy. Andy, during your presentation, you mentioned that there is nothing to prevent someone who would be appointed from running in the next election. But I take it that it's also true that there would be nothing preventing council from asking, if that were the option that was preferred, that someone who was appointed would agree not to run in the next election. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And so any other discussion before we look for a seconder for Councillor Rabbitt's motion? Mayor Chop?
I guess I'm happy to second the motion, but I think the other piece to be cleaned up with Councillor Rabbitt's motion was the debate as to which fashion you're going to do it, whether, the internet voting or strictly the mail-in ballots. And I think based on the clerk's report that he presented, sticking with the mail-in ballots is the way for us to proceed. So Councillor Rabbitt, but that's up to you on your motion there, Howie.
I would agree, and honestly, my intent was to defer to staff's best recommendation, and that's what I believe I was also hearing. And perhaps we should just go back to staff to, I'm agreeing with Mayor Chop. That was my intent, and I just want to make sure that you're receiving that as the direction of the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Rabbitt. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I'm going to have to side with Councillor Huffman. I like the idea, obviously, who doesn't, of a more democratic process and hosting the election, but I too have heard similar concerns from Councillor Columbus, and they're really looking for their voice to be advocated for at the table and votes to be counted from their ward ASAP. So for those reasons, I won't be supporting the motion.
Mayor Chop.
Well, I'm just wondering what kind of a democratic process it is when, council selects who be the Ward 2 representative. And when we do debate issues that affect Ward 2 and they decide that they don't like the decision of that Ward 2 representative that has been appointed by council as opposed to the citizens of Ward 2. So I question, yes, you want representation at the table, but again, you need to have the support of the people of who that representative is sitting at the table.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I hear your opinion and I appreciate it, Mayor Chop. I don't entirely disagree with it. My concern is filling the seat. And so earlier I made the suggestion that there would be a transparent application process submitted through on the public agenda for the public to read. Council could also go to a process just like we are in this meeting right now that would allow for, 3 or 4 or however many council decides, similar questions to all of the candidates with the ability to have an opening statement or a closing statement. And then we don't make a decision that week. We allow the public to connect with us and share their concerns. Yes, it's not going to be, sorry, Mayor Chubb, your face is very distracting with like frowning at the comments. I understand that you don't agree with me, but that's entirely your prerogative. But I have the ability to express the concern here that the process itself might not be the most democratic way to register votes from constituents. However, it does fill the seat a little bit earlier. So if we can collect feedback from them, I trust that we would make a judgment call that favors a position that we're hearing overwhelmingly, and we can fill that seat sooner rather than later. It's not a perfect process. I recognize that. The vote is the most democratic angle to go, but we're sitting here having 4-4 tie votes, and people would like that seat filled. So that's my personal opinion, and that's the direction that I will be going. But I don't think it's black or white that one is extremely undemocratic compared to an election per se. We could go with this hybrid route that would include public debate and dialogue.
And Mayor Chop.
Thank you, Councillor Michelle. Just a question for Councillor Martin. Will we be doing a social media poll on Facebook to determine who the best candidate is then?
Does that warrant a serious response, or are you just being petty today on the meeting?
No, that's an actual question.
In what world is that? Any time that I've shared, through you, Mr. Chair, to the mayor, any time that I've shared dialogue about social media polls, I have said, take it with a grain of salt. This is what I'm understanding. This is what I'm hearing. It is just another measure to hear from community members. So if you are interested in running a poll for the election, then do so on your own social media.
I am interested in running a poll, but an actual poll.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Huffman, did you have something? I thought I saw your hand. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Michelle, through you. I just wanted to go back onto a comment that Mayor Chop made in terms of it being a few months, and it's not a few months, it's 6 months. It's almost half a year. And that just seems like a very, very long time for that vacancy to stay open. I think we can put faith in the residents of Ward 2 that they've probably already started discussion within their ward as to individuals who may be interested in coming forward and getting that seat filled and getting their voices heard. So I don't necessarily think that we need to go through this process. I understand that it would be a great way to go, with the exception of this ward desperately needing representation at this time. We know that we've had issues in terms of the West feeling alienated, and another 6 months is just inexcusable.
And we'll hear from the mover, Councillor Rabbits.
Thank you, and through you, I'll utilize this opportunity as my final opportunity to speak on my own motion. I graciously appreciate the time. I want to take it back to my intent here, and I'm listening to our staff, and I'm worried we won't have the senior leadership with experience with Mr. Grizel, his departure from the organization, to be frank. And I anticipate that if we do go to an appointment process, there will be many more special in addition to potentially some more contentious 4-4 votes. And I'm looking at this option as a remedy to those two problems. And I'm also, just trying to think of how, it is going to take time for us to have presentations publicly, develop the interview questions publicly. I think there is some additional time that it will take to do this properly with the appointment process. And I'm trying to I guess what my intent here is trying to, sort of split the difference. What is going to provide the greatest benefit at the least cost and provide the strongest mandate for this individual? I think it's an election. That is why I'm moving the motion. And it's not that I'm totally against an appointment process. It's not that I don't believe we can do it in an open and transparent way. I'm simply trying to look at the logistics and the reality of the times that we live in and the problem that we have to figure out as a group here. I'm not thinking anything disparagingly about my colleagues, and I don't want to make any of my comments in jest. I'm being genuine here that I do believe the election is the best route, despite the challenges that it has. I acknowledge it's going to take a longer amount of time and it is going to require some cost, but we have to do a cost-benefit analysis, weigh our pros and cons of each of these options. In my opinion, the election is the most open and transparent way. It allows the individual to have the strongest mandate, and it's actually going to result. I think there's some time saving there as compared to going through an appointment process, which hasn't been developed and hasn't necessarily been fleshed out or proposed to us. We're going to have to develop that plan, and I haven't heard it here tonight. We really need to look at this as I believe our best option on the if this vote fails, we'll basically be trying to replicate some sort of election process in chamber. I also want to acknowledge, COVID-19 is going to be used, I think, on both sides of this debate. Why have an election during COVID-19? Well, I would also argue that we're living in times where we do not have the freedom to associate with one another. That right has been suspended due to the public health emergency. I have certain strong feelings about that. We live in times where we do not have the ability to freely travel for non-essential purposes. And these are very trying times. It's difficult for people really to organize and work to. It's going to be a really tough campaign for this individual, whoever is ultimately successful, or those that choose to put their name forward. And thank you for your service during these difficult times. Difficult times do create leaders. I'm confident someone will step forward. But I want to see that through a democratic process. I want to see that through an election as opposed to an appointment process. Thank you.
And I will hear Councillor Van Passen, followed by Mayor Cha.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like this situation resolved as quick as possible myself, but that is just not really the right way to do it. I think even Kathy Schomburger's letter said it best, that they would like to see representation in Ward 2 as quick as possible, but only if the public from Ward 2 gets input into who we select. And you can't have it both ways. Getting public input is called an election. And, and unless my math is wrong, it's an extra 3 months. We could appoint somebody, or it takes 3 months longer, and the people of Ward 2 get to appoint their own person. And that will be the option that I will be supporting. That we run the by-election as quick as possible, even if it's a couple of weeks quicker, if the clerk would be willing to make those adjustments and do it a couple of weeks quicker, if that's possible. I'd support that as well. Use the mail-in ballots. That gives a lot of people an extra option when they're busy, that they can just drop it in the mailbox rather than having to sort of take the time off in the day to physically show up to vote. So I will be supporting the motion on the floor. And, hopefully we can get that process rolling as quickly as possible.
Mayor Cha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My apologies. I think my hand was up there. There is a motion on the floor, and I have had my 2 opportunities to speak.
Thank you. And Councillor Taylor.
Come on.
We can hear you, Councillor Taylor.
Here we go. So actually, I came into today thinking full out appoint, get this done quickly. But Councillor Rabbits, I think, actually dissuaded me with his comments there. and following up with Councillor Van Passen's, this is the only way to have that public input. My only concern that's still sitting there is there any way we can do this quicker? Because they've really only got a year left, and it's I know it's only 3 months longer, but that's still 3 months without representation there. So even like Councillor Van Passen said, if it is a few weeks sooner that we can get that date too, I think that would be beneficial. I just want to hear from the clerk there.
Through you, Chair Michelli. Yeah, so some of the timelines are certainly statutory. So I mentioned the 45 days from the close of nominations to the election day. That's one that we can't change. So right off the bat, you're 45 days. And then there's a requirement that we give at least 20 days notice to MPAC for them to produce the voters list. So, you know, it's a difference. You're looking at potentially a couple of weeks that you could potentially cut down, but ultimately it really needs to be, we need to make sure that our suppliers can make the timeline. So there is a potential to cut it down because right now our suppliers aren't doing many elections here in Ontario, so hopefully they aren't doing other ones. Our suppliers work in the United States, here in Canada, so as long as they aren't tied up somewhere else, we should be able to get some responsiveness. Same thing with MPAC. We should be able to get that information out there, but it is certainly a matter of, you know, maybe reducing a week. And some of the things that we can't also reduce on is the timeline between from when we issue the packages to when we get the voting date type thing, because we need to allow for a final voters list and voters list amendments, and then issue the package in the mail-out package. So generally, if you look at the key dates and timelines attached to the staff report, they give kind of a good idea of where we could cut off some dates. Like you could move the close of nominations up, but already this is quite a tight timeline, and we're already reducing a month out of the potential timeline that we could use. So a lot of municipalities would wait till March to declare a by-election. So if this timeline here is followed, we're actually starting to give out nomination packages by the end of the day, well, by whenever council's done on Tuesday. So as soon as council next Tuesday passes that bylaw, we actually have to have a process open to have nominations available and be advertising for people to pick up nomination packages. So we've lost a month off the front end of this already too.
Thank you, Andy and Mayor Chop. Nope, sorry, Mayor Chop. Thank you. Any other input from council in committee? I just would like to add my own comments that I do have to say that I understand that I think an appointment process will mean that regardless of whatever decision that appointee makes, council will be criticized for putting them in that spot, and those are just my thoughts. But I think if there is no more discussion, we have the mover in Councillor Rabbits, and I believe, if I recall, we do not yet have a seconder.
We do have a seconder. It is Mayor Chop.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much, Kevin. So we have the, and just for clarity, I believe Councillor Rabbits is actually moving option B, that is the election. Is that correct, Councillor Rabbits? Thank you very much.
Yes, that is correct, Mr. Chair.
And I think we've had our discussions. I believe
Mr.
that.
Chair,
yes,
we have the motion read, please.
Yeah, thank you. I was just about to ask for that. Thank you. And Kevin, can you read that motion to us, please? And I'm going to suggest, if I may, with council's indulgence, if I could just make a slight amendment to the previous option. I'm sorry, that's not the option I'm referring to. I'm sorry, forgive me. Kevin, go proceed, please.
Okay, the motion reads that staff report CAO 2108 respecting vacant seat Ward 2 be received as information, and that council direct the clerk to present a bylaw for a by-election and alternative voting procedures.
That is the motion that's on the floor. We have a seconder, and I believe we will continue with a recorded vote on this matter if council agrees. Anyone object to a recorded vote? Okay, thank you. Mr. Clerk, when you are ready.
Councillor Rabbits.
Yes.
Councillor Columbus.
No.
Councillor Martin.
No.
Councillor Van Passen.
Yes.
Councillor Huffman.
No.
Councillor Taylor.
Yes.
Mayor Chop.
Yes.
Chair Michelli.
Yes.
Motion carries. On a vote of 5-3.
Thank you. Okay. I'm going to propose to committee, we have a water report that I believe prepared and ready to go regarding the presentation by WSP. I understand, if I'm correct, that they may require a little bit longer than the usual 10 minutes to present that report. Is that correct? I'm checking with staff on that one.
Yeah, through the chair, that's correct. One of the reasons we started today's meeting early was to allow for a much more lengthy presentation, both to council and to the community, because the report itself is over 100 pages long, pretty heavy read. So we thought a presentation might be more helpful to put the information out there. So we did ask for an earlier start date to accommodate the longer presentation.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Burgess. I just want to make the public aware that this will be longer than the usual presentation. And if the members from WSP are prepared to begin, I believe council is ready to receive their presentation.
All right, thank you. My name is Rita, and with me I have my colleague Maza here. We are from WSP. And if Kevin or Jacob, if one of you could share our presentation and give me control of the screen, please.
Rita, just while you're checking, I just want to ensure that all of committee has that slide deck on their screen. If anyone does not, please let me know.
Jacob, I cannot request control. That option is grayed out for me.
just going to have Norfolk staff transition the slides. So when WSP needs to advance it, they'll just ask for the slides to be advanced.
All right. Okay, let's start then. So again, welcome everyone to our presentation. My name is Rita, and Maza here is on mute right now, but we are from WSP, and we are here today to present to you a summary of the interurban water supply study, and also some short-term solutions for the Port Dover water treatment plant. So today we will be presenting, first of all, the project objectives of this IUWS study, followed by the challenges of the current Norfolk County water supply system. Then we'll move into the current and future demands versus the firm capacity, then the proposed alternatives, shortlisted alternatives, cost estimate, and life cycle analyses, followed by a risk analysis, and finally, the evaluation and recommendation of the study. Next slide, please. So to begin, the study objectives of this IAWS are to develop a long-term, sustainable, secure water supply for the entire county, and to address the concerns in the existing system, and to provide interurban connection. So please note that the data from this IAWS are taken from the county's Integrated Sustainable Master Plan, so the ISMP, that was published in 2016. Next slide, please. So we'll first start off by talking about the challenges of the existing system. Next slide. So just as a refresher, the Norfolk municipal water system supplies several small communities. On surface water supply, which is sourced from Lake Erie, we have Port Dover, which is supplied by the Port Dover Water Treatment Plant, and Port Rowan and St. Williams. Both Port Rowan and St. Williams are supplied by the Port Rowan Water Treatment Plant. On groundwater supply, we have Simcoe, Waterford, and Delhi Cortland. Cortland does not have any operating groundwater wells, and it's supplied via transmission main from Delhi. Next slide, please. So this slide will discuss the challenges with the existing system, and we'll start off by discussing Port Dover, which we identified as the community with the highest risk. So in our case, high risk is the highest risk category. So as previously mentioned, Port Dover is supplied by the Port Dover Water Treatment Plant. The Port Dover Water Treatment Plant operates below rated capacity due to limitations in treatment and pumping. Additionally, the backwash water, which is used to backwash the filters at the treatment plant, is provided by the Port Dover elevated tank. If this elevated tank is shut down for whatever reason, then the Port Dover system capacity would also drop to zero. Because of these water supply challenges, Port Dover has been in a development phase as of 2019. Second, we have Simcoe, which was identified to be high risk. Simcoe is supplied by multiple groundwater wells. Some groundwater wells are at risk of contamination and/or operational difficulties. Existing wells have limited capacity, and some wells have already been taken out of service to ensure water quality and safety. Significant demand increase has also been identified in Simcoe. Third, we have Waterford, which is rated at medium-high risk. Waterford is supplied by 2 groundwater wells. Both wells draw from the same aquifer, which is at risk of contamination from surface runoff. If this aquifer becomes contaminated, then the Waterford supply capacity would drop to zero. Similar to Simcoe, a potential for significant demand increase has also been identified in Waterford. Next. Then we have Port Rowan and St. Williams. These communities were identified to be at medium risk. So again, both these communities are supplied by the Port Rowan Water Treatment Plant, and the plant's capacity is limited by its shallow intake, some process limitations, and also algae is a growing concern. Lastly, we have Delhi and Cortland, which is considered to be low risk. Delhi and Cortland are supplied by 4 groundwater wells, all of which are located in Delhi, and 2 of them were new wells that were commissioned in 2020. There is also a surface water treatment plant in Delhi, but that one will be decommissioned. Go on. So now let's talk about the demands and capacities. So before we get into the actual demands and capacities, let's review some definitions. So installed capacity with regards to a water treatment plant refers to the capacity of the treatment process with the lowest nominal rated capacity. For groundwater wells, the installed capacity refers to the sum of the rated capacity of all the groundwater wells within a given community. Operational capacity refers to the actual operational capacity of a treatment plant or a groundwater well per the county's operations staff. Next, we have firm capacity. So with regards to a water treatment plant, the firm capacity of a plant is the capacity of the plant with the largest unit of a single process out of service. So this excludes clarification units. And for groundwater wells, the firm capacity of a groundwater well system is the sum of the operational capacities of all the groundwater wells with the largest well out of service. Now, firm capacity is important because for planning purposes, firm capacity should be equal to or greater than the MDD. The MDD is the maximum day demand. Another term you'll see in this presentation is ADD, which is the average day demand. So this slide presents a table of the current and future demands of each of the communities that are on the municipal system versus the firm capacity of each community. So to start off, we see Simcoe. So in year 2020, Simcoe has a firm capacity of 7,200 cubic meters per day. And based on the 2020 MDD of 8,200 cubic meters per day, Simcoe, as of 2020, has a supply deficiency of 1,000 cubic meters per day. However, some Simcoe wells have had historic water quality, water level, and/or mechanical challenges, and we have assumed that these wells will be taken out of service by 2023. This means that by 2023, we have assumed Simcoe will only be 30 cubic meters per day. Using this as a baseline, Simcoe is projected to have a supply deficiency of 5,400 cubic meters per day. Next is Port Dover. Port Dover's firm capacity is currently limited at 2,500 cubic meters per day, and in 2020, it has a deficiency of 3,200 cubic meters per day, and by 2041, a deficiency of 4,800 cubic meters per day. Waterford right now has a supply surplus of 200 cubic meters per day, but is projected to have a deficiency of 200 cubic meters per day come 2041. Delhi and Cortland has a supply surplus right now and is projected to still have a supply surplus come 2041. And Port Rowan St. Williams currently has a small deficiency of 100 cubic meters per day and is expected to have a small deficiency of 600 cubic meters per day come 2041. Next, please. So this is just to very quickly sum up the challenges of the system. So Norfolk County is facing multiple challenges to meet its current and future demands. The county-wide water demands in 2041 is estimated to be 24,000 cubic meters per day, and the supply deficiency in 2041 is expected to be 12,100 cubic meters per day. Port Dover's water supply system needs urgent action. Development freeze has been in effect in Port Dover as of September 2019 because of water supply concerns. Simcoe and Waterford are also ranked as high or medium high risk and are in need of an alternative water supply source due to water quantity and/or water quality concerns. There's also potential for significant demand increase in both of these communities. The Port Rowan water treatment plant cannot operate at its rated capacity due to process limitations, its shallow intake, and algae challenges. Okay, go on, please. So now we're going to get into the proposed alternatives, proposed servicing alternatives. Next slide. Okay, so before we go into the alternatives themselves, let's first go over the assumptions that were made in the development of all the alternatives. So we'll go by community, and the first one we'll talk about is Simcoe. So new test wells are being drilled in the northeast side of Simcoe right now, but we have not included them in the calculation for firm capacity because the production yields of these wells have not yet been confirmed. And as previously mentioned, because of some water quality, operational and/or mechanical issues, we've assumed that some of Simcoe's existing wells will be taken out of service by 2023, which means that Simcoe will have a reduced firm capacity come 2023. In Delhi, the two new wells that were commissioned in Delhi were included in capacity calculations, and based on the ISMP, Delhi has a surplus capacity that can be used by other communities in the short term. With regards to Port Rowan, if the water treatment plant is upgraded and can operate at its rated capacity, then Port Rowan and St. Williams will be self-sustaining per the county's ISMP. So assumptions regarding Nanticoke Water Treatment Plant, which is property of Haldimand County. Nanticoke's current rated capacity is 13,606 cubic meters per day. And based on discussions with Haldimand staff and the Watson rate report that was given to us, Nanticoke Water Treatment Plant can supply Norfolk County 2,800 cubic meters a day from 2021 until upgrades are completed at Nanticoke. And we've estimated the upgrades can be done by 2028. Nanticoke's maximum achievable firm capacity is 43,000 cubic meters per day once fully upgraded. So once it's fully upgraded, Nanticoke can provide Norfolk 21,000 cubic meters per day. Haldimand's 2041 max day demand is 22,000 cubic meters per day. So with regards to Class EAs or Class Environmental Assessments, we've assumed that all proposed water transmission mains fall under Class EA Schedule A or A+. This means that if the county were to proceed with constructing water mains, you don't need to undertake a separate Class CA study. Any water treatment plant expansions, including the Nanticoke expansion, will require Class CA Schedule C, and any upgrades to booster stations and/or storage infrastructure will require Class EA Schedule B. Now, Class EA Schedule Bs and Cs need to be conducted separately ahead of the design and construction of the proposed infrastructure. So now getting into the long list of alternatives. So alternatives for the study were developed in three main groups. The first group, is Alternative 1 and its variations, involve Norfolk County supplying itself from lake-based sources. Alternative 2 and its variations involve Norfolk County purchasing water from Haldimand County. And Alternative 3 variations were involving Norfolk County purchasing water from Elgin County. But because Elgin County is the transmission main length and the associated cost with this long transmission main that would be required for purchasing water from Elgin County, that alternative was rejected early on. So this presentation will only focus on Alternative 1 and Alternative 2 variations. So this section discussing long list of alternatives, we're only going to quickly go over the ones that were rejected, and in a later section, we will discuss the shortlisted ones in more detail. So starting off with Alternative 1 and its variations, there were alternatives that were developed as a part of the Alternative 1 group. And in this group, the only one that was rejected was Alternative 1.1. Alternative 1.1 suggested upgrading the Port Dover water treatment plant to meet its local demands and conducting other local upgrades per the ISMP. This one was rejected because it does not provide a long-term solution nor urban interconnection, which was one of the objectives of this study. Go on, please. So this slide shows a summary of the Alternative 2 group, Alternative 2 variations. And you can see here the variations of Alternative 2 were developed, and of the 6, 3 were rejected, and the 3 rejected were Alternative 2.0, 2.1, and 2.5. Alternative 2.0 suggested purchasing raw water from the Nanticoke water treatment plant. This one was rejected because even if Norfolk were to purchase raw water from Nanticoke, Norfolk would still have to undergo extensive infrastructure upgrades in order to treat the raw water. Alternative 2.1 suggested upgrading Nanticoke to supply Port Dover only. This was rejected as it does not resolve challenges in the other Norfolk communities. Lastly, we have Alternative 2.5. Alternative 2.5 suggested upgrading Nanticoke water treatment plant to supply the entire Norfolk County, inclusive of Port Rowan and St. Williams, and there would be 2 connections, one from Nanticoke to Port Dover and one from Townsend over through Simcoe. This one was rejected because the maximum firm capacity that can be achieved through upgrades at the Nanticoke water treatment plant is lower than the combined 2041 maxi demand of Norfolk and Haldimand. And recall, firm capacity is what you're looking at for planning purposes. So if we go to the next slide, please. Okay, so now we will talk more about the alternatives that were shortlisted. Okay, starting off with Alternative 1.2, this one suggests constructing a centralized water treatment plant, 24 megaliter per day, which is 24,000 cubic meters per day, located in Port Dover. So this is the rough schematic of what the alternative would look like. So in the first phase of construction, we've proposed that a connection be built from Delhi to Simcoe, and this would allow Simcoe to use some of Delhi's excess capacity to supplement its own supply. And in the second phase, which you can see in blue, is when we would build the new centralized water treatment plant in Port Dover along with the new intake, and also construct the Port Dover to Simcoe connection. In the third phase, shown in orange, the Simcoe to Waterfront connection would be built. And finally, the last phase, which is shown in green, the connection from Port Dover to Port Rowan and St. Williams would be built. Okay. So this is a schematic of the timeline and the available, and this is a schematic with timeline of implementation of this alternative. On the x-axis, you have the year, and then on the y-axis, you have either the demand or the available capacity. So this is measured in cubic meters per day. So this graph will show up for each of the shortlisted alternatives. And basically here we're looking at 4 different communities: Port Dover, which is shown in blue, Simcoe in purple, Waterford in orange, and Port Rowan in gray. You'll see there are 2 lines for each community. One is the dashed line, and that represents the maximum day demand. And the one is the solid line, which represents the community's firm supply capacity. So if we look first at the purple line, the solid purple line, that represents the community of Simcoe's capacity. You can see Simcoe has about 7,000-ish cubic meters per day in firm capacity, and by 2023 that will drop because we've assumed some of the wells will need to be taken offline. And by 2025, we've estimated that Simcoe will be able to be supplemented by Delhi, so this will increase Simcoe's firm capacity a little bit. And Simcoe will have to stay on a blended supply of Simcoe groundwater and Delhi groundwater until the new centralized water treatment plant in Port Dover, which is 24 MLD, is fully operational, and it will be able to supply Port Dover and Simcoe. So please note here that this alternative does suggest supplying Simcoe with a blend of Simcoe groundwater and Delhi groundwater. And when you blend water from different sources together, that can introduce some water quality challenges, and we usually do not recommend blending. However, because there is a supply deficiency in Simcoe and there is potential for significant demand increase, supplementing Simcoe from Delhi can be done as a short-term solution. That being said, when you blend groundwaters together, then you're less likely to run into water quality challenges than if you were to blend surface water with groundwater. Anyway, back to the timeline. You can see here that by 2028, Port Dover and Simcoe will both be fully supplied by the centralized water treatment plant. And so by 2028, the Port Dover development freeze could potentially be lifted. And then come 2030, Waterford would also be supplied by the centralized water treatment plant. And at that point, all the groundwater sources could be decommissioned. And by 2033, Port Rowan would also be supplied by the centralized water treatment plant. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so alternative 1.3 involves 2 lake-based water treatment plants. So this is kind of similar to alternative 1.2, but instead of building one big water treatment plant to supply the entire county, we would have 2. So the first one would be in Port Dover, and that one would be a 21 MLD plant, and that would supply everything on the east side. And then Port Rowan would undergo upgrades so that it could operate at its rated capacity. So upgrades could include things like building a new intake, deepening the existing intake, or process treatment upgrades. But you can see here, the transmission main layout is fairly similar to the previous one. The only one that's different is that in this alternative, there's no longer a connection from Port Dover to Port Rowan. This would save the county some capital costs because the transmission main length from Port Dover to Port Rowan is quite long. If we go to the next slide, please. Okay, so this is the same kind of similar graph that you saw before. And again, we've estimated that by 2025, Simcoe will be able to receive some supplementary supply from Delhi, and you would have to use that blended kind of supplementary supply until 2028, which is when Simcoe can fully transition to this water supplied by the Port Dover water treatment plant, the new one. And same in Port Dover, once it's fully supplied by the new Port Dover water treatment plant, the development freeze can be lifted, which again we've estimated to be about 2028. And independently of construction of the Port Dover water treatment plant, the Port Rowan plant can undergo upgrades, and we've estimated that potentially Port Rowan can become self-sufficient by about 2027. And if we look at the orange line, we've estimated that Waterford will be fully supplied by the centralized water treatment plant by about 2030. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the first of the alternative 2 kind of variations. So again, all of alternative 2 variations, and there are 3 of them here, involve purchasing water from Haldimand County. So this is the first one. This is alternative 2.2, which involves upgrading Nanticoke to supply Port Dover, Simcoe, and Waterford through one connection. And that connection would be from Nanticoke through to Port Dover. So again, the proposed construction phasing is in the first phase, we would build a connection from Delhi to Simcoe, which is again shown in purple. And this is just to give Simcoe some supplementary supply. And also to build the Nanticoke to Port Dover connection as like a first step, because right now Nanticoke does have some surplus capacity that can be used by Port Dover in the short term. In the second phase of construction, the Nanticoke water treatment plant would undergo upgrades to its maximum achievable firm capacity of 43,000 cubic meters per day, and Port Rowan would undergo upgrades independently of that. The third phase, in orange, the Port Dover to Simcoe connection would be built, and lastly, in green, we have the Simcoe to Waterford connection. And next slide, please. Okay, so this is the implementation timeline. And you can see here by 2025, we've estimated that both Port Dover and Simcoe will receive supplementary supply. Port Dover's supplementary supply will be from Nanticoke and Simcoe's will be from Delhi. By 2028, once the Nanticoke water treatment plant is fully expanded, then Simcoe will be fully supplied by Nanticoke and so will Port Dover. So again, the earliest that the Port Dover community could lift its development freeze would be in about 2028. Port Rowan would be upgraded independently of this, so it could be self-sufficient by 2027, and Waterford could be fully supplied by Nanticoke by 2031. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. This one is alternative 2.3. This involves upgrading Nanticoke to supply Port Dover, Simcoe, and Waterford with 2 connections. So as you can see here, the first connection would be from Nanticoke to Port Dover, like what we just said, and the other one would be from Townsend through to Simcoe. There is already an existing transmission main that runs between Nanticoke and Townsend. So in the first phase of construction, again, the Delhi to Simcoe built and the Nanticoke to be built. And then afterwards, the Nanticoke water treatment plant, Port Rowan water treatment plant would undergo upgrades, and the Simcoe to Waterford connection would be built. And lastly, the Townsend to Simcoe connection would be built. Next slide, please. Okay. So similar to alternative 2.2, we can see that by about 2025, Port Dover and Simcoe will have received supplementary supply from either Nanticoke or Delhi, and Simcoe and Port Dover will be fully supplied by Nanticoke come 2028. Waterford will also be fully supplied by Nanticoke come 2028, and Port Rowan again will be upgraded independently and can become self-sufficient by 2027. The main advantage of this alternative over the other one is that with 2 connections, there is additional supply security and supply redundancy. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. So this is the last shortlisted alternative. This is alternative 2.4. So this one involves Port Dover undergoing upgrades so that it can supply its local community up until 2041, and upgrading Nanticoke to its full 43 MLD capacity so that it can supply Simcoe and Waterford and eventually Port Dover if needed. 2 connections are proposed in this alternative. So in this first phase, so in purple, again, it would be the Delhi to Simcoe connection, and then it would be the Townsend to Simcoe connection, and Port Dover water treatment plant would undergo upgrades to 7.3 MLD, which is sufficient to meet its demands for the next 20 years as projected in the ISMP. So the reason Simcoe is receiving supplementary supply from Delhi and Townsend is because there is a large projected supply deficiency. So if these connections are built first, then Simcoe can receive a supplementary capacity from both Delhi and Nanticoke via Townsend. Please keep in mind though, because Townsend and Nanticoke would be lake water, like surface water, and Delhi and Simcoe are historically groundwater-based communities. If you're supplementing Simcoe with surface water, this may introduce some water quality challenges as a result of the blending. So once Nanticoke can fully supply Simcoe, all the groundwater wells should be turned off to prevent these water quality challenges. Going back now to this kind of schematic. So in phase 2 of the construction, which is shown in blue, Nanticoke would undergo upgrades and the Simcoe to Waterfront connection would be built and Port Rowan would be upgraded independently. And then lastly, we have the Nanticoke to Port Dover connection. This one can be delayed. It has been included in the study just to provide the county with kind of a frame of reference for how long it would take and how much it would cost. But in this alternative, because Port Dover is upgrading its own water treatment plant to meet its local community demands, this last connection from Nanticoke to Port Dover is not critical, although the county could do it if they wanted additional supply redundancy. Next slide, please. So this is a timeline of alternative 2.4 implementation. So as you can see here, if we start off with Simcoe, so by 2025, Simcoe will be able to receive supplementary capacity from Delhi and Nanticoke. And you can see here that the gap between the Simcoe max day demand and the available capacity is smaller than the other alternatives that we presented so far. And by 2028, Simcoe will be fully supplied by Nanticoke water treatment plant. With regards to Port Dover, because Port Dover is undergoing upgrades to make itself self-sufficient, then Port Dover could potentially be, the development freeze in Port Dover could potentially be lifted by 2026. And the upgrades that are required at Port Dover will be discussed in a little bit. So with regards to Port Rowan, because it can be upgraded independently, we've assumed that this can be done by 2027, and Nanticoke can be fully supplied, Waterfront can be fully supplied by Nanticoke by about 2028. So the main advantage you can see here is that Port Dover is the this alternative is the fastest for Port Dover to meet its max day demands and will also allow Simcoe to receive the most supplementary capacity. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this slide presents the upgrades that need to be undertaken at Port Dover Water Treatment Plant in order for Port Dover to be self-sufficient through 2041. So in order of importance, the things that need to be addressed at Port Dover are first, the clarification challenge, and second, the disinfection high lift pumping capacity challenges, the filtration challenges. So for immediate needs at Port Dover, we have to first address the clarification challenge because there's only one single clarifier at the Port Dover plant that's expected to reach end of life by 2022. And if this clarifier went down, then the Port Dover plant would have zero capacity. So the clarifier replacement project is currently underway, and the clarifier will be replaced by dissolved air flotation units or DAF units. And the construction for this project is anticipated to start this year in 2021. So the second challenge that needs to be resolved is the disinfection and high lift pumping issue. So currently at the Port Dover plant, only 2 high lift pumps can be used because of limitations in disinfection. And because of this disinfection high lift pumping restriction, the plant's firm capacity is limited to 2,500 cubic meters per day. So WSP did initiate a UV project to increase the disinfection and pumping capacities of the Port Dover plant. This project was put on hold to focus on the clarification issue, but once the UV project is completed, the plant's firm capacity would increase to 4,908 cubic meters per day. The last challenge that needs to be resolved at the Port Dover plant has to do with filtration. So there are some existing media filters at the Port Dover plant, and they have had some structural challenges. The Port Dover elevated tank cannot be taken offline because it provides the backwash water for these filters. So to address the structural issues of the existing filters, the DAF units, which the project is being underway, the units that were selected can be converted to DAF filters. That's to say that the units can perform clarification and filtration in one single unit, which would take the strain off the existing filters. And if the county were to proceed with converting the DAF to DAF filters project, then at that time, an additional DAF filter unit will need to be purchased and installed. So for the backwash challenge, that can potentially be resolved if the county could consider like adding a backwash supply tank to the water treatment plant, and that way the elevated tank does not need to provide the backwash water. Okay. So now let's get into the cost estimates and the life cycle analyses of the shortlisted alternatives. Okay, so again, we're going to start off with some of the assumptions that were made in the cost estimate. So the level of the cost estimate done in this study was rough order of magnitude. And the operational or just strictly treatment costs for Port Dover and Port Rowan were assumed to be 60 cents per cubic meter. And this was based on historical treatment cost data that was provided to us by the county staff. And for groundwater wells, we've assumed it's 45 cents per cubic meter of treated water. And this is based on similar projects that we've done in the past. Please note that the following costs were not included in the cost estimate of this study because they are recommended for all, and they should be done regardless of what alternatives chosen at the end. So the first one is water quality and corrosion control studies, and these are estimated to be about $20,000 each. And again, this is because of the blending issues that may arise or water quality challenges that can happen when you first transition a community that's historically on groundwater to surface water. We also have not included the cost for local storage and distribution system upgrades. These were recommended in the ISMP, and in 2020 dollars, that's about $17 million total. And we also have not included distribution system related operating costs. So this includes things such as flushing. So these costs would be required for normal operations, regardless of what alternative the county chooses to go with in the end. And then let's talk about the net present value calculations. So this presentation will go through the net present value alternatives. And the interest rate that was chosen for these calculations was 3% and the inflation rate 2%. And these rates were selected to match the Haldeman Norfolk rate study that was conducted by Watson in 2020. Next slide, please. Okay, sorry. So moving on, let's talk about the Watson rate study a little bit. So the Watson rate study was initiated to kind of determine the purchase rate for purchasing water from Haldeman County. And so based on the Watson rate study, Norfolk County is estimated to pay $1.74 meter treated water when Haldeman provides 2,800 cubic meters per day to Norfolk County. So this means the Norfolk County would pay $1.70 before Nanticoke water treatment plant undergoes upgrade. So this would match Port Dover or Simcoe. So of the $1.74, $1.52 of it will be paid to Haldeman County, and the remaining 22 cents is like the debt to cover the capital costs of the transmission main, that little segment located within Haldeman County. And Norfolk is estimated to pay $1.99 per cubic meter of treated water when Haldeman provides the full 21,600 cubic meters per day to Norfolk County, and this would be after Nanticoke undergoes upgrades. So of the $1.99, $1.64 would be paid to Haldeman, and the remaining 35 cents would be the debt to cover the capital cost of the transmission main that's located within Haldeman County and the capital costs of the Nanticoke water treatment plant upgrades. So for more information on this, councillors, you can see the Watson rate study that was done. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so this slide shows a summary table of the cost estimate and life cycle analyses of each of the 5 shortlisted alternatives. So as you can see here, the capital cost is lowest in alternative 2.3. So alternative 2.3 again involves supplying Port Dover, Simcoe, and Waterford from Nanticoke with 2 connections. And the capital cost for this alternative is estimated to be about $69 million. And again, this capital cost does not include the cost of Nanticoke treatment plant upgrades or the little segments of transmission main that are located within Haldimand County. From a life cycle cost analysis, so a 21-year NPV, the lowest NPV is associated with alternative 1.3. So this one again involves 2 lake-based water treatment plants, one in Port Dover and the one in Port Rowan. So alternative 1.3 has an estimated NPV of 180 million. And the alternative with the highest NPV is alternative 2.4. So alternative 2.4 involves upgrading Port Dover, upgrading Nanticoke, and building 2 connections from Haldimand into Norfolk. So alternative 2.4 has a total estimated NPV of 246 million. Okay, let's go on. Okay, now let's get into the risk assessment. So a risk analysis was conducted to determine the potential risks that could impact the success and viability of each shortlisted alternatives. So something that was common for all alternatives was that a lack of funding was found to be a significant risk for all of them. But from a more comparative manner, what we found was alternative 1.2 and 1.3 generally have more critical and high risk compared to alternatives 2.2, 2.3, and 2.4. The most significant risks of alternative 1.2 and 1.3 are associated with the construction of a new intake and water treatment plant in Port Dover. And this is because siting and intake in Lake Erie can be difficult because the lake is relatively shallow and there are other treatment plant runoffs nearby, so the location can be limited. New intakes are generally more subject to permitting delays because of the extensive consultation that is required. And with these 2 alternatives, because these are greenfield build, there's no opportunity for construction phasing. This basically means that the communities would have to rely on existing water supply infrastructure until the new treatment plants are constructed and operational. So to mitigate some of the risks associated with alternative 1.2 and 1.3, the county can initiate discussions with regulating authorities and council early on to keep them involved in the planning process and to avoid delays. Next slide, please. Okay, so for alternatives 2.2, 2.3, and 2.4, in addition to the risk associated with lack of funding, a risk with these alternatives is the jurisdiction of facilities, i.e. how capital costs will be divided with Haldimand for future upgrades. There is also a risk with potential water rate increase over time because all 3 alternatives here involve purchasing water from Haldimand. We should also note that all alternatives, so like all 5 that we presented so far, include building a new intake at the Port Rowan water treatment plant. And again, this is so that the treatment plant can operate at its rated capacity. However, there is less risk associated with the Port Rowan intake than with the Port Dover intake because there is the option of deepening the existing intake if building a new one is not feasible and or undertaking process upgrades instead. One other thing to note is that water quality is a risk for all alternatives as they all involve changing groundwater systems to surface water supplies. And because of the inherent water chemistry differences, the transition period will often result in water quality challenges. And all alternatives also involve blending DELI and Simcoe groundwater for a bit, for Simcoe to have supplementary supply. However, we are anticipating limited water quality impact for this because the groundwater seem to be fairly similar based on a cursory review. But water quality risk is highest for alternative 2.4 because there is an extended period where Simcoe would be using a blend of surface water from Nanticoke and groundwater, which is supplied by itself, and DELI. So to mitigate some of the water quality risks, the county should or could perform some water quality or corrosion control studies before implementing the alternative and increase flushing and monitoring of the distribution system during the transition period or when blending. Okay, so finally we get into the evaluation and recommendation. Okay, so evaluation of the shortlisted alternatives was done through an evaluation matrix, and the complete matrix can be found in the report. And this slide here is just a very simplified color-coded version of what is in the report. So the evaluation criteria was separated into 4 main categories: natural, environmental, technical, social and cultural, and finally financial. So the impact on wetlands, ecosystems, lake systems, etc. Technical criteria included things like ease of construction, timelines, supply security, etc. Social and cultural looked at things such as aesthetics, impact archaeological artifacts, etc. And financial looked at the total NPV. And from this, each alternative was scored, and like the scores were tallied, and we selected a final recommended alternative at the end. And as you can see here, alternative 2.3 was the preferred alternative based on the evaluation matrix. Next slide, please. So the advantage of alternative 2.3 is that it avoids risks and uncertainties associated with a new intake in Port Dover. There is a potential to phase infrastructure upgrades. There's good supply security, and it provides immediate and short-term supplementary supply to both Port Dover and Simcoe. And this one is relatively easy to operate compared to alternative 2.4. The disadvantage of alternative 2.3 is that there is a slightly longer timeline to lift the Port Dover development freeze, and Simcoe receives less supplementary supply compared to alternative 2.4. It is the second most expensive option, and ultimately Norfolk does have less control over water rate, water supply capacity, and water quality because it would be purchasing water from Haldimand. Next slide, please. So this is just, again, a quick overview of alternative 2.3 again, just the schematic here. Okay, next slide. Okay. However, we understand that because there has been an interest in development in Norfolk, we also realize that timeline is a concern. So if timeline is the greatest concern, then alternative 2.4 would be the preferred option. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is alternative 2.4, and again, this one involves Port Dover upgrading itself, upgrading Port Dover water treatment plant so that it can meet its local community demands, and then Simcoe and Waterfront, and potentially also Port Dover eventually, would be supplied through Nanticoke, and there would be 2 connections from Haldimand into Norfolk. Go back to the previous slide, please. Oh. Yeah, okay. So the advantage of this alternative is that it has the shortest timeline to lift the Port Dover development freeze. Simcoe will be able to receive supplementary supply from Nanticoke and Delhi in the short term, which would minimize supply deficiency. The connection to Simcoe through Townsend can also be rapidly utilized by Waterfront, and Port Rowan water treatment upgrades can occur independently of Nanticoke upgrades, and there is good supply security. The disadvantages, though, of this alternative are that it is the most expensive option with the highest total NPV. It is the most difficult operation, and there are potential water quality issues that may arise in Simcoe because of the blended water. Again, and similar to alternative 2.3, Norfolk would have less control over water rate, water supply capacity, and water quality, and this was the least preferred evaluation. But the only advantage really here is that it's quick, and it would allow the county to lift the development freeze in Port Dover in the shortest amount of time. Next slide, please. Okay, again. Yeah, okay, so that concludes our presentation, and thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Rita and Maza. Are there any questions from committee? Seeing Councillor Columbus.
Yes, thank you. That was an excellent jam-packed presentation. My question is with respect to, I saw a note there, 2022 for that pipeline from Simcoe to Delhi or Delhi to Simcoe. Do we not have to do environmental assessments on those right-of-ways where the water pipeline would go? And how would we get them done within a year if we do have to get those EAs done?
So for our study, we assume that all the transmission mains would fall in the right of way, so they would be Schedule A or A+. And if they're Schedule A or A+, you don't need to do a separate Class EA. So if you were to build that connection, then as long as it does fall within right of way and it falls under A or A+, then you don't need to do like the separate EA for that.
That's good news. Would it be going down the rail line, the old former rail line?
I'd have to circle back to that. That I'm not sure where exactly it is. I have to check the report to see where we've preliminary laid it out.
Thank you.
Councillor Rabbits.
Thank you, through you. Definitely a lot of information in there. I want to find out more about the assumptions that were made to arrive at the recommendation that we have here in the slides. It says, I'm referencing, I'm going to have a hard time, the slide number is 40. And I'm looking at the evaluation and recommendation section. It says, if timeline is the greatest concern, then alternative 2.4 would be the preferred option. What I would like to know is if there were any other assumptions made that would arrive at a different recommendation, such as if cost is the greatest concern, if perhaps sustainability or long-term sustainability, for future growth, if something like that was a potential assumption to create a recommendation. If timeline specifically wasn't the driver in your recommendation, what other options were considered for us?
So we did develop a complete evaluation matrix, and that can be found in Appendix D of the report. And that one will also score each alternative for like each individual category. So things like supply security, a certain weight and a certain weight and certain score, so that you can find details on that in the report itself, and that will go into more detail about which one will perform better in terms of things like sustainability or supply security, etc. The reason we brought up timeline is because county staff mentioned that because of the development and some interest, one of the concerns of the Norfolk staff and Norfolk Council was how to most quickly resolve these water supply challenges in Port Dover and potentially also Simcoe. So that's why we brought it up here.
Well, thank you, and through the chair, if I may, I do believe that moratorium and the condition in Port Dover is frankly unacceptable for our community. I have some very strong opinions I'd like to reserve for when we're in debate and we're looking at a potential option or staff questions. But I'm simply looking at a lot of this is very technical, and so I want, for those that might be a lay person or not an expert such as myself, to really understand what the ultimate recommendation is. And specifically, my question is, looking to a sustainability or a long-term view on this. If 2.4 wouldn't be the recommendation, what would that other recommendation be if you could list it as an option? I appreciate you've referenced an appendices, and I'm looking, now I've drifted to page 37 where we have our color-coded diagram. I just want in simple language, if we're looking at purely on cost or purely on a sustainable, or maybe having the most water or the greatest supply, what is that option? What number would it be, please?
So from a supply perspective, if Norfolk wanted to have, for best control over supply capacity or water quality, then your best option would be either alternative 1.2 or 1.3, because in those two cases, Norfolk would be producing and supplying its own water. However, from a timeline and a risk management kind of perspective, because there are a lot of risks associated with building a new intake in Lake Erie, which is what would be required if you were to build a new water treatment plant in Port Dover in order for the county to be self-sustaining. From that perspective, from a risk kind of management perspective, alternatives 2.2, 2.3, 2.4 are more preferable because you don't need to construct a new intake, basically. So basically, from a I guess, a more balanced perspective that kind of looks at all these risks and supply security and redundancy and such, we would have recommended alternative 2.3, which is what is stated on which was stated on 38. But for individually, like which alternative scored best and which criterion, yeah, please do refer to that report. There's a lot more detail in there.
That answered the question directly. Thank you so much for that additional information. Sorry, I'm finished. If we can go back to the chair, I'm not hearing anything.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rabbits. We'll hear from our CAO. Go ahead, Mr. Burgess.
Thank you. I was just going to say, for Councillor Columbus's earlier question, I believe Mr. Gobby can confirm locations, but I believe the intent was to put it in our roadways, and we can provide him with more details on which roads that would be impacted. And WSP has provided a recommendation at this point in time. However, just as per the report, staff aren't forwarding a recommendation at this point in time. Staff is only looking for additional time to review and gather